Let's start with a review of the protests and what's been going on with that. Assistant City Manager Oriano, are you going to lead on this discussion?
Chair Flanagan, let me just make some opening remarks. Again, certainly the events of the May protests set in motion kind of the opportunity we have currently to make significant, meaningful changes in the way we do business. Clearly, it takes time to do some of these things. I think what we'll see is for the June protests, again, a recognition of how we might be able to and must be able to make those changes. What we'll do here is I'll ask Chief Manley to provide his brief comments with regard to the changes that he saw for the June protest to this point. And I'd ask Chief Rodriguez to provide some context in terms of injuries that they may have transported during that time frame, and then end up with Director Farrah Muscadin from the Police Oversight to provide some information with regard to complaints that may have occurred during this time. And so with that, let me ask Chief Manley to provide his briefing.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor, Council members. I'll make just a brief comment regarding the manager's comment a moment ago. Chief of Staff Gay and I actually had the opportunity to engage in a meeting with the city manager and his leadership core team earlier this week, where we really did talk about reimagining the police department, and we talked about things that potentially could happen. Obviously, some of them easier than others, but looked at those functions that don't necessarily have to lie within a police agency, but either do because they always have or because we don't have somewhere else for them. I would join probably everyone that's on this call and on this committee in saying that oftentimes we have our police officers responding to incidents that we are neither the best trained nor equipped for. We are just simply the only resource out there. So as we move forward in these discussions and this city builds additional resources to handle some of those things that do not require an armed police officer, we stand ready and look forward to those discussions as we reimagine these things going forward. And I want to assure you that as we see reports across the country of police officers walking away from their jobs, we're not seeing that here in Austin. The women and men that serve our community are committed. They are showing up every day. They are giving it their all under some very difficult circumstances. So this is a department to be proud of, but like any police department, we are not perfect, and we look forward to making improvements in those areas where we can, and especially as we talk about re-engineering what we would look like in the future. And to that, I'll lead into changes that we made based on the first weekend of protest activities. I've already briefed on that, and I know our time is short, so I'll focus on the what we've seen since that time. And we did make some immediate policy changes subsequent to that first weekend. One of the first things that we did once we realized the injuries that were being sustained by the use of a tool, our less lethal shotgun that we have had in our department for many, many years and not seen that type of an injury pattern, we immediately ceased the use of that in crowd situations, changed that policy immediately. We also immediately ceased the ability to use tear gas on those that have gathered mass gatherings during the peaceful protests. We put a stop to that as well. And then, although it was never used for this, hearing the concerns raised last week over our long-range acoustical device that we have, the LRAD, we are writing that into policy, what has already been our practice, that the functionality of that as a sound weapon, for lack of a better term, is prohibited, and it is to only be used as a public announcement system as we have. On top of policy changes, though, we made additional changes that I think, given what we saw as a change in the protests themselves, the fact that they had returned to what we typically see in Austin, a city that is home to many demonstrations that we have successfully interacted with over the years and even participated in some, we saw that return after that first weekend, and we saw quite a different sense in these protests. We made changes. We actually formed prior to that second weekend what we call community engagement teams of officers that actually go out into the demonstrators and open themselves up for conversation, trying to engage the demonstrators in conversation. Since these demonstrations are so much about policing and police issues, a national issue that obviously we saw happen that led to all of these demonstrations, but our own local officer involved incident as well. So they are engaging the community, building upon that trust, answering questions, and I think that this has been very helpful. We also saw an opportunity to avoid what was the confrontation line at times when we have officers standing there either with their bikes or right at a barricade. It allows for such close proximity that sometimes that can escalate things. So we brought in water barricades so that our officers could have a much greater standoff. We could still provide the security around the event, but our officers didn't have to be directly out there. We also saw some dangerous activity with vehicles that were either driving towards or directly at those that were out protesting and demonstrating in the streets. Made a couple of arrests for DWIs in those instances. So we recognize that, as you would expect, anytime people are out on a roadway that's traveled, there is inherent danger there, even when we put up barricades. So we created a water barricade area on 8th Street as a safe zone for those that were coming out, wanting to demonstrate and wanting to feel safe from the potential dangers of vehicles that were traveling on the road. So we added that to our approach as well. And then we also, when appropriate, are wearing less of the tactical gear and really only trying to have that in use at those times where it may be necessary. So that's a lot of work that we've been doing in that area to try and handle the protests that are going on right now. And then I guess let me stop there because I know time is short and I don't want to go off topic if there's things I have here that you're not interested in.
Thank you, Chief. I want to make sure that we give a chance for Chief Rodriguez to talk about folks who were injured, to the extent that obviously under HIPAA guidelines and other guidelines, we have to be careful about what we talk about, but I want to hear from Chief Rodriguez. And then I also want to hear from our Office of Police Oversight on the complaints. Chief Rodriguez.
Oh, thank you, committee members, and Councilmember Flanagan for hosting this meeting today. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, great. Chief Manley, whatever you've done, all these changes you've talked about seem to be having a great impact. I have the good news of having no more injuries to report on since the changes that you've made, and I think that's tremendous. So I'm very excited to say that it seems that some of the greater injuries that we saw previously are not continuing to occur. And we've had very, very few incidences that EMS has had to respond to. So changes seem to be working, and that's great. At the last report that I gave, Councilmember Kitchen asked to see if there was any other data available from hospitals regarding the injuries. Working with the APH team that does the epidemiological work, we were able to get a report together, and we'll be sending that report, or maybe already have, in background information for you. Just to summarize, they identified about 27 injuries with an average age of about 25 years old, with about 88 to 89% involving the non-lethal munitions. And most of the ED visits occurred between 2 p.m. and 1 a.m. So they were afternoon to late or early morning types of injuries. Really, I was also asked to see if there was any updates on the conditions of some of the individuals that we talked about last time. And unfortunately, because of privacy laws, I'm not able to get any information. Hospitals can't release that information to me unless the patient wants to release that. And we haven't been able to exercise any kind of documents or releases or anything in the time that we've had recently. So I don't have anything new to report on the injuries or updates on the patients. I do want to say that emergency medical services we live in a very unique intersection. It's an intersection between healthcare, community health, and public safety. And our clinicians practice right inside of that domain. So it's where several key things meet that are important to our community. We're excited to help in any way that we can, to be supportive and to exercise and leverage our capabilities going forward. That's all I have today. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Just to preview a question, I did not email you, but would like you to address after our Office of Police Oversight the number of EMS folks who've reached out to me about their hesitation to call on APD in certain cases unrelated to the protests, but I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Ms. Muscadine, are you? There you are. Hey, Farah, why don't you say your piece on that?
Good afternoon, Chair, Council. Farah Muscadin, Director, Office of Police Oversight. Thank you for this opportunity to give you just a quick update on where we're at with formal complaints that we've submitted to Internal Affairs for investigation. So our current number up until last night is 255 complaints that we've submitted for investigation. We've had over 900 contacts in our office between January 1st to yesterday. And those vary from phone calls, emails, and the online complaint form. And just to go over generally some buckets that we're seeing is the three incidents that you all are aware of that have received a lot of media attention. And then specifically use of the bean bags and the rubber bullets, pepper sprayed directly at people in their faces, attitude, kind of impartial attitude, officers engaged with the public at the protests. We have about a half a dozen specifically named officers that have a group of complaints, and general use of force as it relates to pushing and shoving individuals. I am glad to hear about the LRAD. I wasn't aware of that because we do have a bucket of complaints about the deployment of that sound device and its impact on individuals' hearing. So I do think that I'm glad to know that now. That is a huge improvement. But generally, they represent significant concerns the community had about the tactics that were used. That's clearly the general theme of most of the complaints. It is the 255 is pretty significant, but we're moving forward. We're working with. I know Internal Affairs is developing a bucket list, and we will get that list. In terms of how to divide the incidents, we will get that list on Tuesday and hopefully come to an agreement about the complaints that should be investigated. But that's currently the stage that we're at. They're still coming in. We've been, just this week, we've submitted 8 each day. And so they're slowing down, but they're still coming. And I'm happy to answer any other questions, but to date, we are at 255 notices of formal complaint that we've submitted to Internal Affairs.
So the last thing I want y'all to address, since it will mute. The last thing I want y'all to address before we take questions is the more recent videos that we've seen. And I appreciate Chief Rodriguez remarking about the injuries they've seen, but we're also being sent videos by members of the public. So Chief, I don't know if that's something you can address, but I feel it needs to be addressed.
Certainly, and I had that in my notes. I wasn't sure if we were going to go there. There is one I know that is getting some particular attention of an arrest of an individual that was taken down to the ground, and in the process of being handcuffed, there are 2 officers attempting to put him into cuffs, and then a third one joins in on the handcuff. And there are videos on social media that are indicating that he was kneeling on the individual's neck. That case is under review. There is body-worn camera. That individual, the suspect that was arrested in that incident, from the time the initial officer made contact and took him to the ground to the time he was stood back up and walked away to arrest was just over 30 seconds. So everything that happened there happened very quick, and it is all under review right now. I can't hear you.
Oop, I've been so good at that. Committee members, questions? Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Chair. I am having a tough time. I mean, just with the sheer numbers that Director Muscadine just presented, I'm having a tough time imagining that they have the capacity to process this. And I just want to know, as a body, how quickly can we inform council's ability and the manager's ability to help to fortify that office? It doesn't sound even humanly possible to process that much in the way of, I just, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, Director Muscadin, but I mean, do y'all need immediate help is what I'm trying to say. Like, it sounds to me like you probably need some immediate assistance in order to effectively process all those additional complaints.
Well, I'm fortunate and proud to have an amazing team. We are small but mighty, and I mean, I've been able to pull in my community engagement team to help process some of these complaints and also handle the phones because our phones have been extremely busy. But I'm proud that we've been able to, submit these 255. And I'm also fortunate to have the support of the city manager and the deputy city manager who've allowed me to hire some additional resources to help us not only process these complaints, but as they go into investigation, that will need additional assistance. And so we have one person that we've brought on and we have another in the pipeline. So that will be extremely helpful, particularly as we get into the monitoring of the investigation stage, because that will be pretty significant given this number. But I'm pretty confident that we will get the support that we need.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'm sorry, I had one other question as a result of that one question. I'm sorry, I'm hearing feedback from somebody's line. The other thing I would ask is, it would stand to reason for me that as we're moving into this process of reimagining, retooling, right-sizing our resources, should it come out that some of those half dozen or so officers who've received complaints throughout the course of this process, should it come out that they had any previous complaints and or misconduct on the record, what would be the next step, generally speaking, just from a procedural perspective?
So the discipline system at the Austin Police Department it's both written within policy and we have a discipline matrix and it's progressive. And so that's how we look at things is if an officer has committed a policy violation and they have prior policy violations, with progressive discipline, you would see a different discipline than an officer who would not have had a prior similar discipline. So it's outlined in our policy. We have a discipline matrix and it is progressive in nature so that subsequent similar violations are handled at a more serious level.
Thank you for that response, Chief. Is the discipline matrix available for the general public to view? And if so, where can they find that?
Absolutely. If you just go to the Austin Police Department's website and you pull up our policy manual, it is actually within our policy manual. If you just word search it for matrix, it resides within the policy.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Muscadin.
Other committee members' questions? Councilmember Kassar.
So, Chief, thanks for acknowledging that obviously there's a national element to the demonstrations as well as a local element. And so, there were so many folks concerned and all of us here concerned with the killing of Mike Ramos. And so can you, a lot of the questions that we received during testimony, including from Mr. Ramos's mother during live testimony, was when the administrative end of the investigation and when a decision would come out on that case. It's obviously not the city council's within our authority to determine that. That lies within the police department's authority. I do remember that in the killing of David Joseph, that the decision came out from the police department maybe a little bit over 5 weeks after the incident. We're well past that point now. I know that each case is different, and I certainly want the investigation to be thorough and complete, but it has been quite some time. And so I wanted to know what the timeline is on our end to be able to at least give some level of expectation to the community, since that's a big part of what this was about, I think.
Certainly, council member. So as you know, there are concurrent investigations that are underway right now into that incident. One being the criminal investigation being conducted by the Austin Police Department Special Investigations Unit, along with assistance from the Texas Rangers and the Travis County District Attorney's Office. And then the internal process is the internal affairs investigation conducted by the Internal Affairs Division, along with oversight from the Office of Police Oversight. So those are the two investigations that are taking place concurrently. When we do not handle the administrative portion of the case until the criminal portion has been addressed. And so in this instance, the district attorney has already stated that she's going to take this case to the grand jury. And I confirmed with her today that this still has not changed as far as potential dates. And it does look like, given the COVID issues and the lack of a special grand jury at this time, the earliest time that she would have a special grand jury seated to be able to review this case would be August. That would be the earliest. So while we will continue to conduct our investigation, we will wait for the grand jury to make a determination. And then after they make their determination is when we would handle the administrative portion of that case.
And so why was it different, for example, with the case of Officer Freeman? Wasn't that completed and determined well before the grand jury saw that case?
I'd have to go back and look at the timelines and the outcomes. I obviously remember the incident, but I'd have to go back and look at the specifics.
It was months before the grand jury decided that case. So is it a matter of policy? And why does the policy apply differently in different cases?
Again, council member, I would want to go back and look at the specifics of that case. The practice has always been that we let the district attorney review that case first before we handle the administrative portion, but I would have to go back and look at the specifics of that incident to determine why it was handled in that way.
And it's not by law, that's just by practice, is that right?
Correct.
Has the district attorney asked for us to wait on this case?
I haven't asked her whether or not she prefers that we wait on this case, because that has just been our established protocol.
Okay, I think it would be really good for us to have this conversation again, because I think you and I were both there. Many of us were on council at the time, and there was, because of the amount of concern and how serious the case was, and I think this is probably our highest profile case since then. I know that everybody in leadership at the time said it's important to wrap that up quickly, and this grand jury thing was not an issue then. And so I would want to understand why we would be making a different decision in this case. I would not want to mess up any criminal investigation, but of course I would want to understand how we would be interfering it within it in any way, or if the district attorney thought we would be interfering in any way. Because in the only other case that I think has reached this level of public attention since we've been on council, I think it was about just over 5 weeks, several months before a grand jury was impaneled. So it'd just be good to know. I'm not trying to rush anything, but people are asking that question, I think, really legitimately, that if we got something done in just over a month, on the one hand, why wait several more months on the other? One more question for clarity. Is it until after a grand jury is makes a decision that we would wait, or would it be if there is an indictment, which I know we experienced, for example, in the Larry Jackson case? If there is an indictment, do we continue to wait until the criminal process is done through all the way through?
Correct. The grand jury is the next decision point. If it is a no bill, then I would most likely only have 30 days to handle that, because typically the 180 has expired and I've had to seek out an AG extension. So on a no bill, I would have 30 days. If the case was true billed, then we would wait for the trial, as you just explained.
Understood. And so I think that makes it even more important, Chief, given that there is the potential, and we can't know what a grand jury would decide, there is the potential that it could extend even many more months after that. And so I think we would really want to be able to level set the expectation, be able to explain to people why one way in one high profile case that we all remember, and differently in this one. The last comment that I will make is I would really want to hear from you and the manager, apart from the immediate policy changes, just a set of lessons learned, because I think given the number of complaints, I think it's more than just individual policy choices. It's something much bigger about how it is that we can avoid these situations in the future, but we can leave that for another time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Kassar. I know there's a few more questions. I want to time check. We're 25 minutes to 4, and I had instructed staff that we would try to wrap this up by 4. I know a few of us are probably able to stay a little later, and so I don't want to promise that after 4 is going to have the full complement of staff, but we can go a little bit longer if we can make that work. Before we do any more questions, because of the time check, I know Assistant City Manager Ariana, you had sent me 2 slides for the next item, and so I want to give you a chance to review those for the public, and then we will come back and take questions on both of the remaining items.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I guess you're passing me to at least take a look at what those slides are. And this is really in support of the final item with regard to taking a look at the different resolutions, the 3 June resolutions, and how we're going to proceed on that. Certainly, we have done just as soon as Council approved those resolutions on Thursday to really start to work at how might we address the resolutions. There were 2 paths of work. One was to start to identify what the work is and how might we best track it. And so right now you're seeing before you a quick, well, I won't say quick, it took some time to put together, at least initially, a way to track all of the different provisions in each of the resolutions that were approved in June, as well as we are going to track the December 066 resolution for the investigation into institutional racism within APD. So here I'll just briefly show that down the left side is a column to say what the resolution is, the initiative, kind of the short title of each of the be it resolved provisions within each resolution, and then a description. We started to try to categorize each of these, and just generally the categories are general orders, if they respond to that or are related to that, a budget component, if there's a management component, and so forth. And then I started to insert due dates, so that, again, the intent being we will make this information publicly available on a dedicated website that was described in the manager's memo, so that we can be transparent to the community as well as for you, the council, in terms of the progress that we're making on all of these initiatives. Corey, if I could ask you to go to the next page. And so a different view of what you'll be able to see, again, by the different activities and initiatives, a Gantt chart, if you will, to show the progress that we're making. In this particular view, you'll see that, again, I have up here at the top, the investigation into APD institutional racism, which is the December resolution. The very top bar you'll see is the investigation. So the Tatum report was issued. And so that shows kind of the darker color. And then, of course, you see in the second row, the independent consultant that we're bringing on board, which we hope to have by September. And then, again, the end date on that one is driven by, right now, direction in the resolution for a report out in December of 22, and so forth. And so, again, just a preview of the information that we'll hopefully be able to put on this website, in addition to any of the communications, any of the documentation, again, a place for the community to see the work that we're doing and the community members that we will have involved in these different advisory working groups. And so I'll pause there. Again, this was just meant to be a preview of the work that we've already done and the work that we have in front of us.
Great. And if is it okay, Assistant City Manager, if my staff posts that to the message board?
Certainly, it is okay. And
Great.
again,
So,
at some point, we will have the full-blown spreadsheet and Gantt chart available once I've had an opportunity to make sure that the people I'm tagging that have lead responsibilities can deliver.
thank you. So I'll have my staff post that to the message board that this meeting is about. There's its first meeting, Public Safety Committee. We will post it there so both the council and the public can access, because I know it was hard to read. Questions? Further questions either on protests or this item? Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. I have a question for Chief Manley. I understood when we were briefed on June 5th that the command structure during a protest situation was such that there was about 8 to 10 officers under one commander. Is that roughly the structure in large crowd situations?
So it does depend on the situation. That is what we talked about. On a typical deployment, you would have between 8 to 10 officers on a squad with a sergeant. In large crowd control, it may be that you've got supervisors just grabbing additional officers based on the circumstances that are present in front of them. But in the way it is structured, it should be teams of 8 to 10 to a supervisor.
Okay, so thank you. Can you help me understand if it's the individual officer who makes the decision to fire on individuals in the crowd? Does that order have to come from a commander first?
No, anytime an officer is going to use force or deploy a weapon, they have to know that it is reasonable and appropriate. And so these officers are making the decision based on the circumstances that are presenting themselves in front of them. What you may have in the circumstance, especially at headquarters, the supervisors that are behind them, they may see individuals that are in the group that are the ones that are throwing the rocks or the bottles or the other items. They may specifically identify that person to the officer, but it'll be the officer that makes that decision as the way these things play out. In a more organized crowd control, if you're trying to move a large group of officers, you may have a line of officers that are taking commands from the leadership team behind them, sergeants and lieutenants, of when to move forward, when to try and push a crowd left or right as we're trying to clear areas. So in those instances, there may be direction given from the leadership cadre, the sergeants, lieutenants, the command structure. But anytime an officer is going to utilize force, they have to make that decision themselves.
So when force was utilized during the last weekend of May, do we have a better understanding at this point whether that was coming on the command of another officer or strictly by the officer?
That is all part of the ongoing review right now.
Okay. So I'm like Councilmember Kassar, I'm sort of frustrated that we're not able to see the video, and I asked you about that on June 5th, and I think he covered that pretty well today. But maybe you can answer, what are the officers who were known to be involved in those shootings doing now? Are they still?
For those instances that were level 1 uses of force, which are the ones that resulted in serious bodily injury, for those instances where we've been able to identify the individual officer who was involved in that instance, those officers are on an administrative duty right now in those instances.
Okay, and how many of those instances do we have from the protests that were bodily harm that you were?
We were tracking let me see here. We were tracking, I think we have 11 right now that we're looking at that resulted in the serious bodily injury. That's the last count that I have.
Okay, and of those 11, how many of those have you been able to identify the officer who shot?
I'll have to respond back to your office with that. I know an estimate, but I want to get you the exact number.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Kitchen.
I think this question may be for Ray Ariano. I appreciate the transparency. That'll be very helpful in terms of tracking progress. One of the things I'd asked for before, and which I think might also be helpful from a transparency perspective for people to understand, is a document. Perhaps it's a flow chart, perhaps it's something else like that, but it really lays out what the investigation process is. There's a lot of steps along the way for people, and we talk about it and we hear it, and there's just a varying level of understanding of what those are. And I know some of it's dependent on the different situations, but I think that would be very helpful for people. And I understand that you're putting together a website that will have information on it. So having that kind of information would be helpful. If it exists and I just don't don't know it, just let me know. But I think that would be helpful for people to understand.
Certainly, council member, and if memory serves me, I believe there was a document produced. It isn't visual, but certainly I'll go back and find that document and provide it to all of the members here and see if there's a way to visually reflect that possibly as quickly as possible on the police oversight website. But certainly when we get to creating the more substantial website that will be the repository for all of this effort, we'll make sure it gets there too.
Thank you. I think visual would be helpful. Understand there's some complexities, but it would be helpful.
Certainly.
Councilmember Kassar.
So, Chief, I just quickly looked up the news stories, and the timeline in 2016 was February 8th was the day that David Joseph was killed. March 21st, about 6 weeks, a little shy of 6 weeks later, the disciplinary decision was made in that case. The officer was fired. And then it was September 22nd, so over 7 months after the incident, was the grand jury no bill. So in that case, a decision was made the next month, although there was several months before the grand jury decision. So what would be really helpful to me would be to know whether the decision is A, the DA asking for a delay in our work so that for her purposes on the grand jury, or 2, if it's an APD decision, and 3, the why, just so that we can explain it, because people, I think, have rightly asked the question, why one way on one case and a different way on another case. And I would really like to have that information between here and Tuesday, which would be the 2-month mark, I think, of the Michael Ramos shooting. Just whether it's DA asking for it, us asking for it, and the reasoning behind that. I think it's a fair question we're being asked by the community.
Understood.
Other questions? Councilmember Ellis.
Have there been any changes to the way the department communicates with street medics? I know that was one of the topics of concern that came up, whether it was with APD or with DPS, to try to make sure that that people who were participating as street medics were somehow brought more in the loop. I know that APD and EMS and fire have their communications pretty smoothed out, but I just was wondering what kind of what was being extended to street medics in these situations.
I will have to check on that. I will say the crowds have been so much smaller that we're not dealing with what we were dealing with that first weekend, where it was at times, I'm sure, hard for the officers to tell who was whom, but I will check on the specifics. I know that one of the improvements that we did make was the addition of EMS into the DOC so that there was better communication between EMS and APD. As we talked about in our last time we spoke about this, we were unaware through that whole first weekend about the injuries that had taken place. And so we shored up that communication channel, and I'd have to get back to you on the street medic portion.
I'd appreciate that. I think that conversation is going to be important moving forward. As there may be other peaceful protests, it would be good for people who are street medics to understand what are the communication standards and expectations of police and EMS, but also to know where that may differ with DPS, since that's the State Department, trying to make sure that everybody has the information necessary on all sides of this to stay safe. It seems like some of the street medics got caught in the middle trying to help people and maybe thinking they were following the instruction of one officer and another officer wasn't sure that that instruction was given. So I think that's just something moving forward long-term that needs to be looked at and could help make sure people are protected through these peaceful protests.
Okay.
Councilmember Alter, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask for further clarification on the LRAD. I understood that we had changed the policy, and so now it can only be used for announcements, but was it used as a weapon during that weekend?
No, and it never has been. That device has only always been used as a public announcement system. We went back and got with our tactical units to make sure of that, and all of the information is that it has only always been used as a public address system.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
We're down to our last 10 minutes before 4. So we'll definitely take a few more questions. I don't feel the need for us to make time for a lot of statements at the end. Like I started our meeting with, this is how we do the work. And hopefully the public is seeing a difference between this meeting and the council meeting where we do testimony and statements and take positions. And this is where we start holding our staff accountable to the decisions that the body makes. I'll make one closing statement just as a process matter once we're finished with our questions. Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair. I will certainly try to keep it brief, but the timing of today's discussion is especially symbolic since, as we all know, tomorrow is Juneteenth. It's the day that African Americans in Texas, literally almost 2 years after everybody else found out by way of the Emancipation Proclamation, learned that they were no longer slaves to white masters. It is such an important celebration and one that I think deserves a higher recognition. One of those resolutions that I'm going to be bringing forward here in the next couple of weeks is we will seek to make Juneteenth a permanent official City of Austin holiday. Not only will it help our African American employees truly honor a day that is fundamental to our history, it will provide an opportunity for everyone, and that means everyone, to reflect on how far our city, our state, and our nation have come and how much further still we have to go. And so I wanted to make sure to take this opportunity to share those words. And I certainly hope that when we bring the item forward that I'll have the support of my colleagues. Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I had a question about an item, but I will say I absolutely support that. We're also waiting for our Let Texas Vote holiday, so which we often it is our Black and Brown communities that have a hard time getting to the polls sometimes. So maybe sometimes it takes a couple resolutions, so maybe we get both. But absolutely support Councilmember Harper Madison's desire to commemorate this very important holiday. I think was there a future items discussion? Yes, and it kind of is combined because I know we're out of time and wanting to respect everybody's time. We weren't able, I see the chart about the racial disparities resolution. I'm sorry if I missed any very specific next steps on how we're going to address the goals of zero disparities in arrests and shootings. And I think it's also important to point out the report that came out yesterday that showed a great majority of officer-involved shootings in District 2, significantly higher than the rest of the city, and all Latinos significantly overrepresented in those numbers. So I don't know if that's AC. I guess that's partially, I would want us to be able to have the discussion about that report and what we're doing to get to that goal of zero racial disparities. I would like that in a future public safety meeting, since we have unfortunately run out of time, and technically we really can talk about that report because it just came out yesterday and we hadn't posted about it either.
Councilmember Kassar.
Thank you, Councilmember Harper Madison, for recognizing and talking about Juneteenth, and I would look forward to supporting that work. So thank you for raising that. And ACM Mariano, the chart that I'm looking at, I don't see the place for where we might be inventorying some of the military grade equipment. There's both the section about labeling that for us when it's up for a vote, but then also there was a section about just providing us that level of inventory. And so would appreciate that being incorporated just so it doesn't fall through the cracks. Thank you.
Councilmember Kitchen.
I think we're on future items. Is that appropriate?
I think this is the appropriate time to wrap up our thoughts.
Okay. I would suggest, and I haven't had a chance to talk to either of you as chairs, Chair Flanagan or Chair Harper-Madison, but I would like to suggest at some point in the future a joint meeting with the Health and Human Services Committee to focus on public health. And it would be, and that's a big area, but to be more specific, I would like to really have a conversation about our public health department infrastructure and the importance as we move forward. You know, we're talking about various programs that we'll need to be working on and solidifying and doing more work on in the public health arena, but we need to also understand what we have in terms of staffing infrastructure and in our public health department. And so that is something I would just suggest at the appropriate meeting to consider.
Thank you. Councilmember Poole.
Thanks real quick. Chief Manley, ACM Mariano, and City Manager Cronk, when you are bringing back the information on the different cases that we're looking at, I know that Councilmember Sarr was talking about the previous case, the Joseph matter, for example. I want to make sure that in order to not confuse the public, that we also tell the story of what was going on at the time. For example, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and that is delaying grand jury's meeting. And I know that is the district attorney's office is trying mightily to try to figure out how to manage that. So we have a pandemic in this instance, and so it's hard to assemble the grand juries. And then what footage we may have had at the time versus what footage we have now, and to see also how we have progressed. I'm hoping that the information that we are getting from the body cameras is improved over our situations before, but each instance is a unique story, and we need to be able to tell those stories properly, accurately, and adequately to the community so they understand why we are reaching certain decisions and why we're not. If that makes sense to you all?
Yes, that does.
Thank you.
Assistant City Manager, did you want to make a closing statement?
Thank you for that offer, sir. What I'd like to say, again, on behalf of the city manager, as well as my core leadership team, Deputy City Manager Nuria Rivera-Vandermeid and Assistant City Manager Chris Schroeder, we are here to do the work. And we've been doing a lot of planning just to get to this point, and there's more to be done, which starts actually as soon as Tuesday next week, when we'll be gathering to try to figure out, what are these advisory working groups going to look like, and start that process. And very quickly as well to reach out to your offices, because we believe in order for us to be successful, the input that from your offices as well as that might be coming from the community is going to be critical to us understanding kind of what is going to be needed to shepherd through this entire process. So you can be sure that we will be routinely reaching out to you as we go through this process. And certainly, as the example of the spreadsheet and so forth, creating a website where we can be transparent about the work that we're doing. And thank you again for this opportunity to present what is going to be a very long, thoughtful, and hopefully as quickly as we can process to getting to where the council wants us to be.
Thank you, Ray. And so just as a final couple notes, thanks to all of my colleagues, especially my committee members, but really it's very atypical to have the whole council show up to a committee meeting for which they are not all members of that committee. And I think it is an important sign to the public that we are taking this seriously. I am excited to think about Councilmember Alter in your role as chair of Audit and Finance with the mayor and his role as the mayor, how we are incorporating this in the larger budget conversations. And I think there may be some parallel work to this committee in that committee, where you can kind of help figure out how we can parcel that part out for a deeper conversation. I serve on that committee with Councilmember Alter, and so we can have some good crossover there. Something that you said, Ray, about working groups.
Yes.
It is not lost on any of us on this council that the go-to move of elected bodies when they don't want to solve a problem is to appoint a blue ribbon committee. And that is in no way what this council is going to do. I hope it has been clear that this committee is not like what you normally see on TV. This is not intended to be interesting reality show. Sometimes council meetings can be that way, but not this. This is the work that the council approved, and we are going to make sure that we get it across the finish line. I have also had folks in the community send me stuff that is happening in other cities, and they demand to know why we are going so slow. But when you start to scratch the surface, you realize those cities are proposing ideas, or they have council members that took a vow to do something. Government doesn't work fast, and it is frustrating because this is an emergency. We are going to go as quickly as we can. There is no caveat to that. No amount of time we spend on this is going to make me happy, but we are going to push as hard as we can. And speaking for myself, and I am sure speaking for every one of my colleagues, that as long as we all sit in the seats we are in now, we will not take our eyes off the ball on this work. Any remaining comments from the committee members? Thank you, Councilmember Harper Madison.
Chair Flanagan, I just wanted to say you run a tight ship and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I run a lean meeting. Thanks everybody and staff for all of your attention. 3-hour committee meetings are not supposed to happen, but this one was a productive one. To the public, please stay engaged. Please keep emailing us. All of your words are being read, even if we can't get to the 15,000 emails and reply to them individually. So at 4:02 p.m., I adjourn the meeting of the first Public Safety Committee. Thanks,
Just for you, I'll sing a hymn to